Check out today's piece of OtakuDaiKun fan art. This is an awesome piece that Shaft IT made for my birthday. If you didn't know, Shaft's the artist who designed the current look for Daikun and Daichan. Now you know who to thank for the drip. Thank you so much. Welcome back to OtakuDaiKun. Dai here. Today's video is actually a response to an earlier one I made called Bridget is Trans? Discussing gender in anime. What brings this on is the fact that Arc System Works, in their most recent Developer Backyard article, have clarified that in both Japanese and English, Bridget is indeed coming out as a trans woman in Guilty Gear Strive. When Bridget said, "Onanoko desu kara," this meant, because I'm a girl, in a very literal sense. This wasn't some expression like being the girl in a relationship or something like that. The fact that Bridget only says this line in one of her arcade mode endings doesn't matter, because the devs were implying her coming out in the other endings as well. They clarify that none of her endings are canonically bad or good in the first place. We even got clarity on Bridget's backstory. Officially, as the original Japanese creators put it, Bridget was born as one of two biological male twins in a superstitious town that viewed twins of the same sex as a bad omen. Her parents, not wanting to exile or kill her, decided to keep her sex a secret and present her as their daughter rather than their son. This allowed Bridget to grow up in that town without its residents suspecting her, and it turns out she liked being raised as a girl. However, her parents still felt guilty as shit for forcing this identity upon her, and to help ease their guilt, Bridget went on a campaign to dissolve the superstition. She became a successful bounty hunter while proclaiming herself to be a boy, not just in the mental sense, but also biologically. She proved that even though she's a biological male, she turned out just fine, and there was no reason to fret over her and her brother. Mind you, this means the village didn't give a damn about what gender these twins identified as. It was purely a concern of biology. With the superstition dispelled, Bridget can now decide for herself how she wants to live, and has officially chosen to identify as a girl, no matter what her parents, her town, or other fighters in Guilty Gear think about it. This doesn't mean the town was right about their superstition, because the superstition was focused on the fact that both Bridget and her brother were born with penises. I know when gender politics get brought up, people want to ignore the obvious biological state we're born in. But it's important here because biology was the basis for the bad omen in the first place. The truth of the matter is that Bridget, who is a biological man, had succeeded in life despite having a twin brother. The option of raising Bridget as a girl wasn't some ultimatum put on her parents by the town. Her parents hid the fact that she was born male, and had the town found out, I imagine they still would have tried to kill or exile her. What we're dealing with now in Strive is a separate issue. Regardless of Bridget's sex, who does she want to be going forward? It's important to note that she's not vindictive about this revelation either. She was never like, "How dare you misgender me?" Rather, it was her realizing that, yeah, she likes being called a girl and wants to live as such. If only the fans could be so cheerful about all this. And no, I'm not actually siding with the pro-trans fans either. We'll get to that later though. I'm honestly really happy Arc System Works finally clarified this, as my previous video pointed out how vague and non-committal they were being. Fans had every reason to be skeptical in either direction, leading to a lot of combativeness. With the truth laid out in stone, per se, I'd like to feel a sense of closure on this matter, but we're not quite there yet. There's an interesting fallout to this news, and I'd like to discuss the implications that Bridget being trans has on how we express our fandom for anime and Japanese media. For starters, part of me is relieved to know this isn't a product of overbearing localization. Unlike situations where anime femboys are treated as trans throughout butchered English text, the Japanese creators at Arc System Works fully intend for her to be trans. That was our greatest fear, and thankfully it's not the case, at least in this one instance. Localizers aren't off the hook for the other bullshit. Of course, my gut tells me the next thing to fear is that perhaps there was no need for dishonest localization, because Arc System Works has simply internalized the woke agenda being pushed on them from the West. Perhaps they've sold out their own beliefs for an attempt at global appeal. We certainly know that Sony and Square Enix have been altering or toning down their content lately with family-friendly policies and ethics departments. Who's to say this isn't just another incarnation of those? The more I think about it, the more I'm inclined to say there's just not enough evidence to make that accusation. It would be pretty fucked up to tell a Japanese artist that their work isn't Japanese enough. It would suck to accuse someone stepping out of their comfort zone as having been led astray. A while back, I made a video debunking the idea of internalized misogyny, at least when it was used to justify why women artists prefer making sexy designs. It's insulting to imply that a creator's artistic inspirations are merely the product of being brainwashed into a certain ideology. If a woman happens to like drawing big-titty anime girls in skimpy clothes, that doesn't mean she's a victim of the patriarchy. In that same way, I don't think it's fair to accuse Arc System Works of making Bridget trans because they were internalizing the woke agenda. I'd like to believe they did so because they wanted to, not because they had to. This leads me into the next concern, grooming. From the very moment this drama first emerged, people took the idea of Bridget being trans as offensive because it meant Bridget was succumbing to grooming rather than sticking true to her own conviction. Some people interpreted it as the town winning in their attempt to convert her. Thankfully, we now know for certain that the town did nothing of the sort. It wasn't their idea to raise her a girl. They always thought she was a girl because her parents presented her as such. Sure, the circumstances sucked because this identity was forced on her, but luckily she enjoyed it. If it weren't for her parents' guilt, she would have just continued on as a girl happily. Of course, just because someone likes what you do to them, that doesn't make it okay. That would be like saying a teacher can molest their students as long as they liked it. In that regard, I can understand why some fans might be upset. However, again, the more I think about it, the more I can't help but think that if this is grooming, then we groom our children all the time. If Bridget's parents were able to raise her as a boy, they likely would have done so. How is that any different? Would expecting her to conform to masculinity be any less forceful than having her be effeminate? Unless you take a perfect gender-neutral stance on parenting from the get-go, you're bound to force some kind of gender conformity on your kids. If you raise your kids to be atheist, Christian, Buddhist, or Catholic, isn't that a form of grooming? Without some kind of foundation, how would a child ever freely choose one path in life over another? Plus, we talk about consent all the time, so at what point is a child old enough to consent to what religion or career they want? The ugly truth is that we're influenced by our environment no matter what, regardless if we're old enough or ready for it. We have autonomy, but that autonomy is built upon various experiences we had well before we could choose who we wanted to be. What this means is that if Bridget were raised to be effeminate for a more pleasant reason, then it wouldn't have been an issue. She may not have had a choice back then, but she does now. It would be weird to tell her she shouldn't identify as a girl just because she didn't get to choose when she was a child. That'd be like saying, but you only want to be a girl because you were raised that way. Maybe, maybe not. That's for her to decide. The matter of choice when it comes to fictional characters is kinda weird, and that alone makes Bridget's transition trickier to navigate. There are two ways we can look at characters, that being either as icons or as believable conscious beings. Let's look at Pikachu as an example. This cutie has no major character arc in either the games or anime. You can pick up pretty much any episode and you'd be at the same pace. His appeal is almost entirely based on his iconic, recognizable features.
It's Pikachu!
It's the fairy!
The same goes for Hatsune Miku. I've talked about her in the past, but Miku is intentionally designed to have as little character as possible. By that, I mean she's a bit of a blank slate for creators to fill with their own visions and interpretations. In that regard, Miku really does belong to each and every one of her fans. Hardly anything about her officially changes, because that would disrupt her status as an icon. It's certainly objectifying, but we often love how we can obsess over and collect merch of our favorite characters. These characters exist exclusively to cater to that appeal. In the same way, many people thought of Bridget as an iconic femboy for the longest time, prior to Strive making her trans. They had an expectation that the character would remain iconic for them, but that iconography is being traded for a more dramatic character arc, which has a completely different appeal. Obviously, characters are simply the products of their design and writing. Their choices are only an illusion crafted for us to follow along. They aren't choosing so much as they're puppets being controlled by their creators. However, we love to pretend these characters are alive, to the point where we often care more about the choices of fictional characters than those of actual human beings. Part of the dilemma we're seeing with Bridget is an intersection of these different appeals. If we see Bridget as a real person, we can understand that she's just one person making a choice for herself. If we see Bridget as an icon, then we tend to put more meaning on her identity than the journey she takes to get to it. It's almost a perfect inversion of Nautos Dilemma in Persona 4. In that case, it was trans supporters being upset that they weren't represented. Naoto made her choice to remain a tomboy rather than a trans male. Most of us look at that situation and ask, why can't you just accept the identity Naoto chose, rather than injecting your trans headcanon? Here, we have fans upset that Bridget has chosen to be a trans woman rather than a femboy. Is it fair of us to say, can't you just accept what Bridget has chosen for herself? Yes and no. At the very least, I can understand why some fans are still salty, even after Arc System Works' statement. For one, there's a special stigma held against fans wanting Bridget to remain a femboy: transphobia. If you don't shut up and accept this new narrative, you're transphobic. Bridget was trans all along, and you just refuse to see it because you hate trans people. We don't have language quite so scathing to hurl towards people who seem to hate femboys and tomboys, but the situation is nearly identical. In either case, you're putting pressure on someone else to think the way you do. The other issue is that the pro-trans side of this thing has nothing to lose. Bridget was a guy, but now identifies as a girl. If she'd remained a femboy, then things would have been peaceful. This incident has perhaps unintentionally put a target on the very nature of femboys and their validity. Now we've got people saying stuff like, Bridget should have been trans in the first place. The way she used to be written was problematic fetishization. He was a joke character that was made before modern media would accept a trans girl. The worst take being that femboys and tomboys are somehow transphobic. And yes, I've made a video on that too, if you'd like to learn more. Someone on Twitter said that being upset that the anime community has lost another femboy is as cruel as a father telling his trans child that he's lost a son. I mean, if you told this to Bridget's face in universe, it'd be pretty fucked up. However, it's not quite the same when you take the full context into consideration. A femboy coming out as trans isn't an issue on its own. The insistence that femboys are all just trans eggs denying their transition is, though, and for some fans, we're seeing that sentiment running at full force. In that regard, I can understand why the pro-femboy side of this feels threatened. They had representation, and it got taken away. Whereas if the pro-trans side wanted representation, they could have gotten it from an original character. Again, the issue stems from seeing Bridget as an icon rather than a person. I feel most of us would want to just embrace Bridget for who she is and celebrate her decision along with her. Sadly, there's this fear that it may be a bad omen for the existence of femboys in the future. We fear that while we can accept Bridget as an individual character making a personal choice, others will make it into a larger statement. Ironically, that causes both sides to make it a statement, and that's the current state of debate. I have no idea if this tension will ever resolve on its own, but here are some things I hope everyone can keep in mind. 1. People upset by Bridget's new arc aren't necessarily transphobic. 2. Bridget's gender identity was not obvious, and there was plenty of room for interpretation until now. 3. Just because Bridget was officially written to be trans doesn't mean we can stop being skeptical of localization. So far, she's the exception, not the norm. 4. Tomboys and femboys do not invalidate the existence of trans people, and just because some of them do wind up identifying differently, that doesn't mean they made the correct decision. Rather, they made their decision, and it shouldn't have any bearing on the choice that other people wind up making. Some are gonna stay femboys and some are gonna be trans women. Both should be allowed to exist without threatening each other. Therefore, nobody should be thinking of Bridget's gender as a win, regardless of which side they were rooting for. 5. Do not harass fan art that labels or portrays Bridget as a guy. Even if Bridget calls herself a girl, a huge part of her appeal has been her history as an otokonoko. So if you see these tags, don't take it as a personal attack. I can guarantee you Bridget would understand where they're coming from. Honestly, we should all be more like Mikiya Kokuto from Kara no Kyokai. When he's asked if he'll love Shiki regardless of her gender, he says he would, though he'd prefer her be a girl. Considering every aspect of Bridget is the same except for how she refers to herself, I hope we can put this behind us amicably. That does raise another question, though. What if Bridget wanted to fully transition? What if she took hormones, got breasts, and had reassignment surgery? I wouldn't necessarily blame a fan for not having the same interest in her anymore. It calls into question how superficial our attachments are, but these are fictional characters after all. What do you guys think, though? Is this a sign that more femboys are going to be erased from media and pressured into coming out? Does this mean that Japan is being internalized by the woke ideology? Are you able to just appreciate Bridget for who she is? Also, for a more lively discussion, what would it take for you to suddenly stop liking your favorite character, or feel like they've changed too much for you to remain a fan? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching!
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to OtakuDaiKun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all of our anime discussion, lore, or Let's Play content.
You can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or our YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like exclusive vids and early access.
As always,
celebrate your fandom!
I want to give a special shout out to all my $10 and up supporters: Video Gamer 75, Stephen Elak, Samuel Gersten, Otaku Mom, Jens Bauman, Mystic Samurai 1983, Freebrick, Cosmonaut, RNGer Shuffles 1498, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Johnny Tsunami, Link Pendrago, Brandon Baker, Observer Bellis, Caitlin P, Vladimirovna, Succubus Sakura, Normace, Jonathan Padua, The Taz 96, and SF Giants fan Mike. Thank you all so much.